It's time to get goosebumps, shall we? In the small, quiet town of Ravenwood, Ohio, there was an abandoned house that everyone avoided at all costs. Situated at the end of a cul-de-sac and surrounded by dense forest, Blackwood Mansion was synonymous with fear and mystery. They said that the house was cursed, that the previous residents had disappeared without a trace, and that at night, inexplicable sounds echoed from within its walls. Even during the day, the house exuded an aura of abandonment and decay, with its broken windows, doors creaking at the slightest touch of the wind, and a once majestic garden now overrun with weeds and gnarled trees. Residents of Ravenwood told stories about shadowy figures that could be seen peering through broken windows and about muffled screams that came from inside the house during full moon nights. The house seemed to have a life of its own, a shadowy entity that watched the city and waited for new unwary visitors to claim it as its next victims. Even the animals avoided the mansion, and the birds that ventured to perch on its roof didn't take long to flee, as if they sensed an evil presence. The city's children challenged each other to see who could get closer to the house, but none of them dared to go beyond the rusty gates. Local legends spoke of Mary Blackwood, the last resident of the mansion. Mary was a lonely woman, known for her beauty and the secrets she kept. It is said that one Halloween night, more than 50 years ago, she mysteriously disappeared. Since then, the house has remained empty, as if awaiting his return. Residents reported seeing shadows in the windows, hearing disturbing laughter and, on some nights, the sound of distant, melancholy music playing on the piano. Those who dared to approach the house said they felt a cold and oppressive presence, as if they were being watched by invisible eyes. Mary Blackwood's story was shrouded in mystery and tragedy. Born into a wealthy family, Mary grew up isolated, without close friends or relatives. Her parents died when she was young, and Mary inherited the mansion, where she spent most of her reclusive life. The few who had contact with her described her as a woman with a sad and distant look, always dressed in black. She was said to be often seen in the local cemetery, crying over an unmarked grave. Theories surrounding her disappearance ranged from kidnapping to suicide, but no one knew for sure what happened on that fateful Halloween night. On Halloween Eve, a group of teenagers, led by Jack, a curious and fearless young man, decided to explore Blackwood Manor. They wanted to prove that the stories were just urban legends and that there was nothing supernatural in the house. Armed with flashlights, cameras and reckless courage, Jack, Sarah, Tom and Lisa walked through the rusty gate and towards the house. The air seemed to grow thicker and colder as they approached, and a feeling of unease began to grow within them. The group had spent weeks planning the expedition, purchasing equipment and discussing theories about what they would find. Jack, the leader, was skeptical of ghost stories and was determined to prove that the mansion was just an old, abandoned house. Sarah, on the other hand, felt morbidly curious, fascinated by the mystery of Mary Blackwood. Tom and Lisa, lovers, were more concerned with supporting their friends than uncovering dark secrets. As they entered the gates, they felt an immediate change in the atmosphere. The wind seemed to blow stronger and colder, and the sounds of the city disappeared, leaving only the rustling of leaves and the creaking of rusty gates. Upon entering the mansion, they were greeted by a sepulchral silence. The interior was covered in dust and cobwebs, and the air smelled musty and decaying. The walls, once adorned with luxurious wallpaper, were peeling and marked with dark, sinister stains. Walking through the long, dark corridors, the group came across locked doors and furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts from the past. The tension was growing, and every noise seemed amplified by the oppressive silence. They explored each room cautiously, lighting up dark corners and recording everything with their cameras. They found a living room with an unlit fireplace, a ballroom with a broken chandelier, and a kitchen where plates and silverware were scattered, as if someone had left in a hurry. In one of the rooms, they found a portrait of Mary Blackwood, young and beautiful, but with eyes that seemed to follow them around the room. The portrait was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the details were incredibly vivid. They felt a heavy, oppressive presence, as if Mary's own eyes were watching them, and a shiver ran down their spines. On the second floor, they found what appeared to be Mary's room. A large four-poster bed dominated the space, and an old stained mirror reflected their nervous figures. Suddenly, one of the lanterns flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness for a few agonizing seconds until another lantern was turned on. It was then that Lisa noticed something strange in the mirror. An indistinct figure seemed to be watching them from behind their own reflections. An icy chill ran down their spines as a low, unsettling laugh echoed through the room. The room was decorated with antique furniture, a huge wardrobe and a dressing table with dusty perfume bottles. There was an atmosphere of abandonment and sadness, as if the room had been frozen in time since Mary's disappearance. Jack approached the mirror, trying to understand what Lisa had seen, but the figure disappeared before he could confirm it. They felt a cold breeze pass through the room, despite the windows being closed, and they heard a barely audible whisper, as if someone was trying to talk to them. Panic began to set in, but Jack insisted they continue. Frightened, they decided to go down to the basement, where they hoped to find something that would explain the strange events. The basement was even darker, with damp stone walls and heavy humidity in the air. When they searched the place, they found an old diary of Mary Blackwood. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but they told a story of loneliness, despair, and a frantic search for power and immortality. Mary had dabbled in occult practices, trying to find a way to reverse the death of her beloved, who had passed away under mysterious circumstances. The diary was full of notes about rituals and spells, written in an ancient language that Sarah, a history student, was able to partially decipher. Mary described her attempts to communicate with otherworldly spirits and entities, searching for a way to bring her beloved back to life. The notes became increasingly desperate and frantic, culminating in a final ritual that she believed would make her immortal. Jack, who was initially skeptical, began to realize the gravity of the situation and the connection between the strange events and the rituals described in the diary. As they read the diary, the cellar door closed with a deafening bang. The lantern lights began to fail again, and an inexplicable cold invaded the room. An invisible presence seemed to tighten the air around them, making breathing difficult. The sounds of slow, shuffling footsteps began to echo in the basement, and Mary's disturbing laughter mixed with unintelligible murmurs. The group, now terrified, tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. They grouped together in the center of the cellar, desperately shining their flashlights around them. Sarah tried to calm the group, reminding them that they needed to remain calm to think of a solution. Tom, trying to maintain his composure, began looking for an alternative way out, while Lisa held onto the diary as if it were her only hope. The basement seemed to narrow around them, the shadows approaching as if they were living entities. They felt trapped, and their panic was beginning to turn into despair. Desperate, they continued to read the diary in the hope of finding a way out of that nightmare. In the final pages, Mary described a final ritual that she believed would give her the power she desired, but which instead trapped her between the worlds of the living and the dead. Her soul now wandered the mansion, desperately seeking a way to complete the ritual or find someone who could free her from her eternal prison. As he finished reading, the murmurs became louder and more intense, as if something was approaching them. The final pages of the diary were stained and almost illegible, but Sarah was able to decipher that Mary had made a pact with a dark entity in exchange for power. However, the ritual went wrong, condemning her to a ghostly existence. Jack, feeling responsible for having brought his friends into that situation, began looking for a solution in his own diary. He found a passage that suggested the ritual could be undone if the words were recited backwards. With tension growing and time running out, they decided to give it a try. With one last effort, Jack recited the words of the ritual backwards, hoping to break the spell. The temperature in the basement began to rise, and a bright light filled the space. The oppressive presence began to weaken, and the basement door opened with a click. The group ran out of the house, without looking back. When they finally left, the mansion looked older and more decayed than before, as if a weight had been lifted from its foundations. Although they escaped, they knew they would never forget what they had experienced that night. Blackwood Manor stood, silent and empty, but now they understood that some legends are more than just stories, they are warnings not to mess with the unknown. They decided never to talk about what happened that night again, but the experience left a deep impression on them. Jack, Sarah, Tom and Lisa moved on with their lives, but the memory of the mansion and Mary Blackwood's presence continued to haunt them. From that day on, Blackwood Manor became even more isolated, shunned by everyone in Ravenwood, and its horror stories became even darker, passed down from generation to generation like an eternal warning. If you like this story and want to prevent something horrifying from happening to you tonight, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. After all, Mary Blackwood may be watching. And you don't want to know what happens to those who don't sign up. Also, follow us for more spine-chilling tales and spine-chilling mysteries. Sleep well, if you can.